I recently mentioned that I might do full reviews of several Mega Man games, and would probably start with the X series if I did. I've also mentioned my intent to do a deep dive into Axel as a character, and, as a consequence, have replayed X7 several times, which could be seen as cruel and unusual. While one of the three games oftentimes cited as a contender for the worst Mega Man game of all time might seem like an odd place to start my look back at the series, as probably the only person in existence to ever get all the Hunter medals for this entry, I'm probably the most qualified individual to talk about the game. I'm Wes, the Explosion, and today we're gonna try and figure out why a title in the illustrious X series became one of the most hated games of all time, and universally panned. Rather than drag this out, let's just address the elephant in the room. This game is 3D, at least some of the time. Some levels use a 3D perspective, some have you side-scrolling, and some have you swap mid-stage. I personally don't hate the idea, at least in theory. While most people have preferences, I think platformers can work really well both ways. Here though, neither seems to work. Normally, I'd attribute it to growing pains. While Mario was very successful when he made his jump to 3D, we're still arguing over whether it was a good idea for Sonic or not. It's a bit harder to give X7 the benefit of the doubt though, since the Legends series exists. I did some research, which consisted of 2 quick Google searches, and X7 came out in 2003, whereas the first Legends came out almost 6 years before, at the end of 1997. While it might not be everyone's cup of tea, I doubt many would argue that Legends did control much better. And I mean, to be fair, Legends and X are 2 different styles of games, the latter being more action-focused, whereas the former is more of a dungeon crawler, almost like a Legend of Zelda with an arm cannon. It's also possible that 2 completely different teams worked on the titles, with only the Mega Man brand being what they had in common. It's still pretty weird to have such a downgrade in quality, several years after the fact though, and the 3D sections aren't even the only thing to suffer. Even the 2D bits play much worse than previous games in the series. The characters you can play as feel much heavier and clunkier, and are just generally kind of unpleasant to control. I have a few guesses. Maybe their lack of expertise with 3D made them slow down the 2D as well to bring things more in line. You can also upgrade your characters, and they move a bit better if you boost the right stat. So maybe their nerf movements are to make those more impactful. Though, needing to work just to make characters feel a bit better to play is more discouraging than motivating. To avoid being completely negative, X7 does have a 2-character party system that's kind of neat. Before starting a stage, you choose 2 characters to use and you can swap between them as you like. If one dies though, that's it for the life. It's a little weird how, if you aren't paying attention to your health, you can die even if your second character had full health. The issues don't end with the controls though. This title might just have the worst level design of any Mega Man game. A few could have been interesting but are poorly executed, like the Ride Chaser stage where you have to move around a track and collect time bombs, but rather than zip around, it's easier to just scoot forward slowly. Or the Internet stage where you flip to the underside of the level, which is more disorienting and barfy than anything. Most of the time though, they're just really boring. Most are just straight paths without a lot of reason to search around. Most upgrades aren't really hidden, and if they are, it's just slightly behind something that kinda blocks your line of sight, so exploration and intuition aren't really required. There's one hidden path in the forest level, and a few rooms in the tunnel stage where searching the whole area can net you some stuff, but for the most part, the game is detrimentally straightforward. And anytime when you have to ride on a moving object is a mess. You constantly slip backwards, and while I could see that being slightly intentional when you're on a jet, with the wind resistance, that you experience it on the back of a lumbering mechanoloid kinda makes me think that this was a glitch they couldn't figure out how to fix. And unlike in the past, where you have a specific hitbox that keeps you on or off a surface, here the game seems to have more trouble deciding, your sprite stuttering as it goes back and forth between letting you on or kicking you off an object. This is both the 2D and 3D sections, horizontal and vertical surfaces. The last several levels are an absolute mess, the first being a scrolling stage that goes on for way too long, without enough forewarning to deal with what's in front of you, unless you want to lag behind a bit and get hit by the enemy chasing you. The second just has a boss that's a pain, and the third has a lot of badly positioned enemies that more or less require you to get hit to get into a position to actually attack them. As for the boss fights, some are pretty easy with ranged attacks, some are a pain unless you have their weakness, in which case they're easy, some are damage sponges, and some attack you before you can even frickin' dodge, so kinda poorly executed, like a lot of things in this game. Heck, for Sigma's first form, he spends a lot of time blocking and teleporting, really dragging things out, and for his second, at times he'll just float out of range, just kinda leaving you standing around. For collectibles, you have 2 sub-tanks, a weapons tank, and an EX tank, like they've been doing since X4. There's a heart tank in each stage, but only the character who grabs it gets it, so be careful. And then there are the stranded Reploids you need to rescue, like in X6. Some give you only a bit of health back, some an extra life, and some grant upgrades, like expanded weapon energy, health, or chips. For the up stats, they go to whoever saved the Reploid. For chips, it expands one stat, either attack, speed, or special, and you can assign these to a character you're currently using. You have to do so immediately in between stages though, so you can't save them for later when you have a different character in the party. These Reploids can also die. Permanently. While it's always frustrating to have missable collectibles, it's even worse here because sometimes they spawn in really disadvantageous positions, like in the way of an attack or in an enemy's lap. Heck, in the tower level, an enemy in the middle of the stage is randomly tossing attacks your way, sometimes causing a rescuee to appear directly on top of one and instantly killing them. On top of that, until the end of the stage, there's no indication which Reploid gives what power up, making it hard without a guide to make sure that the right character gets the right buff, or even if a downed one is worth resetting for. It's less than ideal, to say the least. There's a new game plus that I did not know about until my 4th time through, when I tried to pop back into one of my completed files to grind out a few hunter medals and it started me back at the beginning of the game. While you still have to recollect things like tanks, weapons, and Reploids, some upgrades, like X's armor and chips, carry over. With this you can max out all your characters, which is kinda neat, but I wish they would have advertised this better. I only came across this by accident. It's par for the course though, given how poorly things are laid out in this game. For menus, you typically have to hit the confirm button for something twice, even for something as simple as going back to the stage select, and they default you to no, so it's really easy to accidentally cancel out of things and have to navigate your options again. Several of them toss in extra steps, making them even more of a pain to use, and when Alia lifts out the Reploids that were either rescued or killed at the end of the stage, it's really slow. It takes a lot of practice with the menus just to make them barely tolerable. Now on to individual characters, starting out with the new kid on the block, Axel. At the start of the game, the kid is king because he has range, and spammy range at that. He can hover for a short period of time, which can be good for getting around. When he gets a new power from a boss, this grants him not only special ammo, but also a new weapon. The ammo gives him the boss's attack, as per usual for the series, but the new gun he gets gives him stuff like dual wielding or heavier shots. This is great because even if you run out of weapon energy, the power isn't completely gone and you can still get off a bit of extra damage on some enemies, as well as just adding variety to his gameplay. Most significantly, he can fire a copy shot which, if it kills an enemy, can be used to grant him an ability. For smaller enemies, this just gives him a stat boost, but for those that are closer to his size, he can transform into them for a short period of time. This lets him do things like fly or walk across spikes, depending on the form. This is another cool idea that's implemented a bit clumsily. First, the shots are kinda slow and don't do much damage, so to work, you either need to commit to plinking away at an enemy or really learn how much damage they can take. Second, there's no canceling out of a form once you take it, you only returning to normal once your weapon energy runs out. That makes it a bit awkward if you need to go back to either Axel or swap to another character. Still though, Axel does probably control the best out of your options. I don't know if they put more effort into him to really sell the character since he was new, or if, because this is his first game, I just didn't have any biases about the way I thought he should play, but when I used him, it tended to be the closest I got to having fun. Ironic since he's the worst one to choose. Zero probably got it worst in the game. Zero's always been the more agile character, his more close-range combat requiring him to move about and attack swiftly, so this game playing clunkier really hits him hard. There seems to be some delay to his attacks, and with how some bosses will keep their distance, close range is just a losing prospect. Some bosses will also give him a new ability, which will sometimes give him new weapons, but none of them seemed as fleshed out as they should be. Instead, it's seeming like he only has a full moveset spread out across 3 blades that you have to swap between. You really only want to switch from the sword if you know that the other 2 weapons will specifically wreck an enemy. Still though, he has a double jump, giving him more verticality, and his sword can reflect some projectiles, making him a good choice to bring along, though mostly for specific obstacles and enemies, and largely to avoid needing to do an extra run through a level. And then there's X. Now you might be wondering why I've taken so long to talk about the star of the series, and that's because the game does the same damn thing. X has taken a firm pacifist stance in this one and has gotten himself a desk job. He'll only step into the fray to end the war and cut down on casualties once you rescue half the Reploids in the game. Let me say that again. The guy with his name in the title is only playable halfway through the game, and only if you're doing a good job at that. The only reason I can think of that they did this was to encourage you to try and play Axel, rather than just use Zero and X, and this is somewhat founded, given that X is the best in the game. Yeah, I know that I said Axel plays better, but X just has too much going for him besides. First is his buster. You can spam small shots like Axel's guns, or charge it up for a meteor hit. Then there's the armor. As always, this greatly boosts X's abilities. The boots allow him to float. He descends and you don't stop until you hit the floor. While Axel is more straightforward and easier to control, so that I prefer his hover even with its limit, X is still close enough to work as an alternative. The chest piece reduces damage and grants the Giga attack. The buster allows for the charging of special weapons, as well as throwing out a few extra homing projectiles with charge shots. The game does have lock-on for ranged attacks, but it's not the best, sometimes not clicking with an obvious enemy, or just going off target if you're not looking at it hard enough, so the extra guided chip damage is nice. The charge specials are kind of underwhelming though, instead of doing something unique, just being a bigger version of the normal attack. The helmet does something. That's normally the throwaway part anyway. While I wouldn't call the armor bad, it does kinda somehow feel unimpressive, though that could be largely the fault of the game as a whole. So yeah, while Axel might play smoother, X is just too much of a powerhouse to pass up. If only the new guy had his own unique set of power-ups. The game's music is fine, I guess. While it'd be pretty far down the list if I had to rank Mega Man soundtracks, in a vacuum, it does what it needs to. It sets the mood, none feel too repetitive, and I can listen to it. For visuals, they're also fine, for PS2 anyway. Some of the humanoid characters have something weird going on with their faces when a cutscene zooms in close, but overall, it's acceptable, and I don't think that the character designs are all that bad either. Axel looks cool, and the new Mavericks look like they fit in with the established world. The voice acting is when things get questionable. The main characters sound amateur at best. The individual bosses are a bit more passable, since they're more cartoonish caricatures, and seem to have a bit more feeling put into them as opposed to X and Zero. Or at least they would be, if not for the in-battle lines. Each boss has a few they'll say, and say them they will, over and over again, throughout the fight. These get stale really quick, and it's especially harsh in the protracted encounters. Add in one boss who summons 2 decoys, each one also stacking the same 3 lines on top of the originals, and well, when I originally tried to play this game many years ago, I actually stopped when I got the High-Enard, due to taking damage to my sanity. As for the story, it's a Mega Man X plot. Maverick stuff is happening, there are 8 new animal robot bosses, and by the end, you'll find out that it's all probably somehow Sigma's fault. Before each boss fight, you get some extra dialogue between them and whoever you're currently using, but it's really only interesting if you're playing as Axel. Zero is largely there and doesn't seem to care much. X spends half the game behind a desk, getting mad at everyone else for fighting, and each boss encounter pretty much comes down to him saying about how fighting is wrong, while the other party notices how he's currently charging up his buster. He's also really harsh on Axel, blaming him for much of what's going on, and if you get either X or Axel's ending, determined on who deals the final blow to Sigma, X still doesn't accept him, instead chastising him for not understanding what it means to be a hunter, though luckily he seems to let up a good deal by the time X8 rolls around. Focusing on Axel though, he's the one that kicks off the game by running away from home. He was a part of a mercenary group called Red Alert, doing mostly reconnaissance for the group and serving as an almost little brother to some of its members. He leaves the team though when they start taking on more questionable jobs, going after targets beyond just the bad guys. Under the guidance of a mysterious new benefactor, I wonder who it is, Red Alert sets out to recapture the young Reploid because they're told that his copy ability is central to powering up their unit. His transformation ability opens up a lot of possibilities for the series, that Capcom uses a good bit in both X8 and Command Mission. Plus, his encounters with bosses do a lot to not only contextualize his role in Red Alert, but also do give some of the members of the mercenary unit a personality beyond just some murderous creature boss that shouts at you. If for some reason you wanted to play this game specifically for story reasons, I'd heavily recommend making Axel your main. He even gets the only cool cutscene in the game, though you see that one regardless of who you're using. At this point, I have played X7 6 times. The first time, I quit when Flame Hyenard nearly drove me insane. The second time was when a pair of friends and I wanted to play through all the classic and X games, and that time we actually beat it. The other 4 were all in the last 2 months, making me question my life choices. To go over them, the first was when X6 broke me and I needed to do something else. While I can't say that the horrible experience made me like X7, it at least made me not hate it as much as I thought I would and found myself almost having fun at points. The second was part of my goal to stream all the X games, and I succeeded. The third was another stream where I concentrated solely on Axel to research him for a video, and this run, I was kind of mostly almost having fun, making me question if I had Stockholm Syndrome. The fourth time was when I discovered the New Game Plus, and this was specifically to get the last of the Hunter medals, and I was mostly going through the motions. I learned a lot of cheese for saving all the Reploids, though it did require some resetting. At this point, this might be my third most played X title, only having more time in with the original and X4. Even with all my reasoning laid out like that, I still have to question myself on why I played this game so much. I've improved significantly, my first run taking around between 4 and 5 hours, and now having it down to under 2 with New Game Plus and a little over if I started from scratch. And hey, like I said at the beginning, it does make me oddly qualified to talk about the game, so there is that. End of the day, this is an odd game to talk about. Like I said in my X ranked video, it's a bad game, but not the worst game, not even the worst X game. I'd describe X6 as hell and X7 as purgatory. It's something I can do, though I'm largely numb while I'm doing so. It's almost enjoyable with Axel, though that's not what's best for efficiency, sadly enough. Given the quality of indie games and even some Flash titles done by a single person, this is really unacceptable, especially for a Mega Man title. The whole thing feels like a tech demo made to show the higher ups and be a proof of concept, but as a game, it feels unfinished, like many of the ideas weren't refined and fleshed out enough. I question how this ever got published, and it seems a little hard to piece together. When I looked at the Mega Man X official complete works for Insight, all the normal suspects seemed to be trying to distance themselves from the project. Some talked about how they joined pretty late on this title. One pointed out how they immediately went back to side-scrolling in X8, and even Inafune, the one largely credited with being the voice behind the Mega Man franchise, made a point of saying how he really only did Axel's design for the game. Maybe the normal crew was working on other projects and Capcom farmed this out or gave it to a bunch of new employees who hadn't really found their footing, but what we have here is a game that's bad, but the boring kind of bad. Its gameplay and story aren't so bad that they're good. The glitches are minimal and none are hilarious. While there's definitely some unfair stuff in here, it's not pull your hair out hard, which would have made it fun to watch somebody rage at. Instead, what you have is a game that's functional enough to play, but not really any fun to do so. The few good points, or almost good, all relate to Axel. making me feel like this game could have been alright had it been a spin-off starring the kid, with more effort put into refining him and the levels rather than making it into an X game. But alas, we live in the timeline with X7 instead. The only people I can recommend this game to are those that already own the Mega Man X Legacy Collection 2, because at that point, you already paid for it, you might as well see how poorly made it is. Even then though, only play a few levels and then put it down, it's not worth finishing. Only a crazy person would do multiple runs due to a perverse curiosity, having something to prove, and possessing a case of gaming OCD. Really, just go in, take a look around, and then leave once you've found that the place isn't quite as stinky and the floor's not quite as sticky as you were led to believe, but know that there are nicer establishments out there, on the same street no less. X7 everybody!